at the time, and he was so good at pastoral counseling. It seemed like every couple that left his office was just like smiling. I don't get it. And I remember just talking with him. I'm like, man, I don't get it. Yeah, tell me, what did you do? Because I feel like the more I try to fix their issue, I don't know what to say. I don't know how to respond. I feel like I'm making things worse. And I'll never forget his response to me, and it always stuck with me. Is he goes, you know what? Your problem is that you think your job is to fix their problem, when in reality, your job is to help them fix their eyes on Jesus. And listen, I think for some of us today, especially if you're a frustrated fixer, you need to hear that so deeply. Hey, listen, you might think your job is to fix them, when in reality, your job and my job is just as simply, when you're dealing with a broken-hearted Hannah, is to just simply help them fix their eyes on Jesus. It's because, listen, when I quit trying to be the fixer is when I can actually become an instrument of the healer. When I step back and I remove myself from a place I was never meant to be in the first place, that's when God can actually start to do the healing work that only He can do. See, we're called not to fix others, but we're called to help them fix their focus on the only one who can. And so for some of us, that might mean zooming in. You're zooming in on someone. Sorry, I don't mean zooming in, coming in to rescue and save the day. But I mean zooming in terms of just being empathetic, of being sympathetic, seeing the problem, seeing the issue, and just being there for them and being there with them. For others of you, maybe it's not zooming in, it's actually zooming out. Again, you need to take a step back and quit trying to operate in a pay grade that's beyond your level. And allow God to do the healing work that only He can do. Because here's what I put on my notes this way, is that you got to understand that only God can heal a broken heart and ultimately the brokenness of discontentment. Only God can heal a broken heart and ultimately the brokenness of discontentment. See, until Jesus healed the brokenness in someone's heart, that angst, that emptiness, that lack of fulfillment, that lack of satisfaction, until Jesus is allowed to fix and to heal that heart, to do what only He can do. It doesn't matter how much affirmation you pour into it. It doesn't matter how much stuff you buy and how many nice things you do for that person. It's always going to just ultimately empty out through the bottom of the cracks of their brokenness. See, only God can heal a broken heart and ultimately the brokenness of discontentment. Which brings us back to Hannah. Brings us back to Hannah and really the turning point in her story and the turning point in our stories where we want to break free from discontentment. See, eventually there would come this point in Hannah's life where she quit looking to the paninis and quit looking to the someday or the something to fill this emptiness, to fill this discontentment she felt, or the Elkanahs looking for someone to fill this void. Eventually, she made a choice. Eventually, she made a decision that rather than looking to someone or someday or something to fix her problem, she resolved to fix her focus on God. And we see this in 1 Samuel 1:9. It says, after they had eaten and drunk in Shiloh, Hannah rose. Some translations say stood. And really, that just pales in terms of translation of actually what that word really means. So it's more than her just like standing up and like, all right, I think I'm going to go to church today. No, she made a choice. She made a decision. She resolved. This was a conviction that she felt. And it was a choice that she fleshed out and she embodied, and a choice that you and I have to make if we ever want to be free from discontentment. And it took kind of a form of three parts. The first part is that she released her grip on the very thing she griped the most about. She released her grip on the very thing she griped the most about. We see this in verse 11. It says, and she made a vow saying, Lord Almighty, if you will only look on your servant's misery and remember me and not forget your servant, but give her a son, then I will give him to the Lord for all the days of his life, and no razor will ever be used on his head. Now, this might seem like just a sentimental rhetoric or verbiage here. Oh God, if you give them to me, I'll give you praise and I'll give you glory. But so much more than that. See, what she's actually doing here, she's making a Nazirite vow to God. She's making a Nazirite vow to God. In fact, just kind of a quick historical lesson here. In those days, you got to understand that to become a priest, typically you had to be born into a priestly family. That was like the only way that you could become a priest, was to be born into a priestly family outside of this vow right here. Like if you weren't born into a priestly family, but your family wanted you to become a priest, what was required was this taking of a Nazirite vow. This vow, which meant that you gave away your whole life. You renounced all your family property, and you went to live and to grow up in the temple. So get this. When she takes this Nazirite vow for this kid, she was renouncing hold on everything you would have wanted a kid for. Right? I mean, taking the Nazirite vow meant that he wouldn't grow up in her house. She wouldn't get the emotional joy having him around. She wouldn't get to show him off at baseball games and watch him do the dab like my boy and do all these celebration parties. And, she wouldn't have him to take care of her in her old age. She wouldn't get to do so much of the things that a mom gets to experience with a little one. See, what you got to get is it's not some kind of sentimental rhetoric. Oh, God, give me a son and I'll give him to you, like some subtle way of bargaining. How many of you ever done that with God? Oh, God, if you'll just do this for me, you'll deliver this to me, if you'll give me the new car, or you give me that bigger house, then you know what? I'll actually host a small group, right? We do this bargaining thing, but that's not what's going on here. She's making a sacrifice. She's giving it all. She's surrendering it all to God. See, a Nazirite vow meant a complete renouncement of everything she'd hoped to obtain with having this child. And yet, here's what I love, and here's where this starts to really turn in terms of encouragement here. Look what she's done. When she's done praying this, when she's done surrendering it all to God, in verse 18 it says, "Then the woman went her way and ate, and her face was no longer sad." Her face or her countenance had changed, some translations say. Now you got to understand the order of this. Again, this is before she's pregnant, which, by spoiler alert, she eventually becomes pregnant and has a little one. So, sorry to kill the dramatics of the end of the story, but very important order here. Again, she prays, she seeks God, she surrenders it to God, and notice this, it doesn't say then she got pregnant and then she had joy. No, what we find here is this order of she prays, she seeks God, she surrenders to God, finds joy, and then gets pregnant. Very important order there. See, what has happened? All her life, she saw joy, she saw contentment in having a kid. And that's something, or that's someday, or that's someone. But right now here, she finds it somewhere else. And that somewhere else we actually see in 1 Samuel 2, verses 1 through 2. It says, "My heart exalts in the Lord. There is none like you, Lord. There is no rock like our God." See what she's doing here, and eventually she would actually go on in this prayer to just talk about God's greatness and His goodness and His wisdom and His mercy and His love for us. This treasure of a relationship with God. As now she basically, what she's doing in this, she's saying, listen, God, I'm still asking you for a son, but all my life I've asked you to give me a son to make up for some deficiency in my life. It's always been for me. But now I'm asking one for you. See, you're my sufficiency. You're my treasure, God. And so if you give me a son, he'll belong to you. But my kid, my boy, that's not the source of my joy. That's not the source of my contentment. The source of my joy, the source of my contentment, the source of my fulfillment is found in you, God. It's found in you. See, she found joy when she released her grip on the very thing she used to gripe about. She used to complain about, why does Panini have all these kids? Why does she have the brand new minivan? Why can't I have this? Why can't I be blessed like that? When she learned to, instead of griping and complaining, learning to worship and learning to surrender and learning to give it over to God, that's when things began to change. Not just in the inside, but as we're going to come to discover outside her life as well. Which leads to the second choice she made, and we see in this, is that she refocused on God's all-sufficiency rather than our insufficiency. She refocused on God's all-sufficiency rather than her insufficiency. Like 2 Corinthians 12:9 says, it's God's grace that is sufficient for you and for me. So often when we hear that word grace, we think of it in terms of simply forgiveness. And while it is that and so much more, it's it's definitely this reminder that it's forgiveness. It's sufficient. No matter how many times you slip up, no matter how many times you make a mistake, when you run to God, His grace is sufficient for all of our failures, our flaws, our sins in life. But it's more than that. That word grace in Greek speaks of God's blessing. It speaks of God's favor on our lives. See what Paul's getting at here is that listen, he's trying to draw our attention, our focus, that his blessing, his goodness that we have in this relationship with Jesus is more than enough for all the needs in our life. In fact, I wonder how many of our lives would change if we truly believed that God's grace was sufficient for us. That God's blessing, this blessing that's found in a relationship with Jesus, that He is truly the source of every good and perfect gift in our life. If we really believe that, how would our lives be different? In fact, it's interesting because in James, it actually kind of talks about this tension a little bit. It talks about some of this discontentment and some of this frustration with some sometimes empty prayers or what feels like empty pursuits in our life. And I like what he says, and as a result, he kind of speaks to this question that if you struggle with discontentment at all, is a question I think you and I have to always come back to and always ask ourselves. And I like how he puts it in James 4:2-3. He says, "You desire but do not have, so you kill. You covet but you cannot get what you want, so you quarrel and fight. You do not have because you do not ask God. When you ask, you do not receive because you ask with wrong motives, that you may spend what you get on your pleasures." See, what he's describing here is this frustration, this discontentment, this feeling blessed, but why the empty prayers? Why the empty pursuits? And yet through that, he kind of draws our attention to the question that, again, you and I, if we ever hope to break free from discontentment, you and I have to always ask in our lives. And that is simply this, is what is the motivation? That thing that you're pursuing, that thing that you're chasing after, that someday, that something, that someone that you're after. What's that desire that's fueling your drive for more? See, could the real question or discontentment be not why don't I have this, but why do I want it so badly? Why do you want that thing so much? Why do you want that promotion? Why do you want that man? Why do you want that house? Why do you want that thing, whatever that thing is? Because here's the thing, is that you and I could get in the practice of asking that question. What you're going to find is you start to peel away the layers. You start to discover a deeper drive behind all those pursuits. For some of us, it's maybe that pursuit of value. Maybe for some of us, it's that chasing after worth. For some of us, it's that pursuit of significance or fulfillment. Again, though, things not found in a something or a someday or a someone, but it's found completely and totally, sufficiently in a relationship with Jesus. In fact, I like Psalm 37:4 puts it this way. It says, "Delight yourself in the Lord, and He'll give you the desires of your heart." It's not talking about, hey, you're going to walk away, you're going to walk out of here and you just, spend time with God and all of a sudden you're going to have a brand new boat waiting out there for you. That's not what it's talking about at all. It's talking about the deeper needs, that deeper want, that deeper desire, that thing that drives us to oftentimes chase after things in places, looking for stuff in places that can never deliver. See, it's this reminder that when you and I, we press into God, when we delight ourselves in this relationship with Jesus, listen, you and I, we've got everything that we could possibly need in a relationship with Jesus to feel more than blessed. Because it's in a relationship with Jesus we find value, we find significance, we find joy, we find happiness, we find our worth. Which leads to the third and final choice what we got to make tonight. And we find it in verse 12. And I love how she does this, is that So often this decision to really get behind, unpack the layers, discover what is really driving us. Why do we want this thing so badly? Learning to surrender it all to God. She gets to this point to remind us that really this is not just a one-time choice. If we want to experience contentment, true fulfillment, true joy in our life, it's something we've got to make a decision continually on. Look what she does here. Verse 12, it says, as she kept on praying to the Lord. See, this is the third choice you've got to get. Is you and I, we've got to, if we want to break free from discontentment, you've got to be resolved to keep praying. You've got to be resolved to keep praying, because here's the thing about contentment. Contentment isn't about settling for less, but it's refusing to settle for anything less than God's purpose and His promise for your life. Did you get that? Contentment isn't about settling for less, but it's refusing to settle for anything less than God's purpose and His promise for your life. Do you realize that not all discontentment is one and the same? It's not. Yeah, there's some discontentments that obviously lead us to pursuits, to chase after a fulfillment, a satisfaction, a significance, a contentment apart from God. And of course, as we've discovered, that leads to nowhere fast. But then there's another discontentment that I honestly is really my prayer for some of you tonight. And it's called a holy discontentment. It's a kind of discontentment that like Hannah, it pushes us, it drives us to delight in God, to worship God. It sends us and drives us to our knees to keep pursuing and to keep seeking God. A holy discontentment. Listen, and this is why this is important, is that if there's any of you in here that God has placed a dream on your heart, maybe a hope for your life or for a relationship or something in your life that is yet to come to fruition, you got to get this. Because if you hope to ever, you'll break free from just stalling out and settling for less than God's promise, settling for less than God's purpose, settling for less than God's best in your life, you got to understand something about prayer. And that is that your prayer can never outpace your patience. Your prayer can never outpace your patience. Listen, you'll never have a prayer that's answered bigger than your level of patience and willingness to wait for it, to persevere in it. The promise can't be bigger than your patience. Sometimes the bigger the prayer, I really believe this, I think the longer the wait. In fact, since we're talking about motherhood and we're talking about moms, I put it this way in my notes: the bigger the baby, the longer the gestation period. The bigger the promise, the more significant it is, the longer you'll end up waiting. Do you know the mammal in the world with the longest gestation period in the world is? Does any guesses? What did you have? Elephant. Yes, an African elephant. And do you know how long the pregnancy is for an African elephant on average? Yes. Well, of course, our college scholar over there. So yes, 22 months. So think about this. This elephant's pregnant for 2 years. Like, you thought 9 months was bad, ladies. I mean, 2 years. Think about that, right? Now, and listen, I share this because to share this point is that you don't produce an elephant overnight. You don't. And sometimes when you're in a season of waiting, what you can't perceive is that you have to wait because the thing that God's trying to do and bring about in your life is so significant, it can't happen in a flash. Any guesses the mammal that has the shortest gestation period is? No, but close. A possum. 12 days that thing's pregnant. Kind of explains a lot when it comes to the look and actions of a possum, right? Now, come on, think about this. If you're an elephant and say your friend is a possum and you guys are texting with each other, hey, we're pregnant, isn't this awesome? How great this is. You're posting Instagrams of your bellies and, you're putting it out there and, just celebrating this thing. And 12 days into it, The possum's like, hey, I got good news. My babies are here. How do you think the elephant's going to feel, by the way, in that moment? The elephant's like, what? I'm just starting this thing. I got 2 years to go. What do you mean you're pregnant? What do you mean? You've already delivered these babies. I don't get it. I've got all this way to go. And listen, I share this because, listen, if you're willing to be content, just pushing out possums, that doesn't take very long. But if you want to give birth to something significant, sometimes you got to be willing to wait. Sometimes you got to be willing to persevere. Sometimes you got to be willing to keep on praying, even when you don't feel like it, even when you don't want to. Sometimes you got to be willing to surrender it over to God, even when it just feels like the last thing that you have any desire to do for. See, it's choosing, again, it's this call to sit there and say, look, I'm not going to settle for anything less than God's promise and God's purpose in my life. That's true contentment. It's not settling for less. It's refusing to settle for less than what God wants to ultimately do in your life. And for some of you, it's going to take getting a little bit of holy discontentment. Now refusing to just kind of settle into less than the life that God's, called you to live, because maybe you tried praying for a little bit of a season. It didn't work out the way you thought it was going